Hey everybody, welcome to Bytes. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes, so you've still got a little bit of time. Grab yourself something to drink and get comfortable, and we will be kicking off shortly. Just to let you know that we have turned off your cameras and muted your microphones just to save a little bit of bandwidth in this session. But please feel free to get in touch with us using either the chat or the Q&A. If you click on the little speech bubble, that'll open up the chat window. Or if you wiggle the mouse, your menu should pop up. There'll be three little dots. Click on those and you will get the option to open up the Q&A window. So you can get in touch with us either way, chat or Q&A. We'll be monitoring both of those during the session. We'll be starting soon, so get comfortable. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the session. See you soon. Good evening and welcome to Bytes. Thank you for joining us. We're super excited. This is our first event post-pandemic back with a live studio audience. So hello, live studio audience. Hello, getting waves from everyone there. It's really good to have you all here. And I'm especially super excited to introduce my guest, Tristan Oliver, who's joining us for this evening's session. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming.
You're welcome.
So for anyone who's new to Bytes is something that takes place on the first Friday of every month. And every month it's a different topic with a different panel, some industry experts, and we just sit and we talk about light and lighting and all sorts of things. So thank you for joining us. If you haven't seen any of our previous sessions, if you swing past the website, which is etcconnect.com/lightbytes, there's another little button down the bottom to view previous sessions, and our history channel is there, and you can see everything that we've done so far. So that's enough of a welcome. Tristan, thank you very much for joining us. For everyone who's with us, I think we'd agree that I think you must have the coolest job in the world. So how did you get started? Tell us a little bit about you and how you end up doing what you do.
Well, goodness, I mean, that's quite an interesting take on it. I often say that anyone who goes into this as a living needs their head read, really. I mean, it's not something that I would recommend as a way to make a living. I think I just sort of lucked out with it in terms of projects I've had to work on. I came up in a slightly unconventional way. I had somewhat of a life as an actor initially. My parents were theatrical costume makers, so I kind of grew up around the theatre, and I went to university and I did a drama degree. And at the end of my second year, I auditioned and got a role in a movie. Not the biggest role, but a significant enough role in a movie. And that was the first time I'd been on a film set, and I was entirely transfixed by the process. You know, I simply had no idea that that's what making film was about. And I got on incredibly well with the camera crew, and Peter Bijou was the DP on that, and got on with him very well. And, you know, he taught me about how to behave in front of the camera. But I was more interested in what was going on behind the camera. And so I had this kind of overnight conversion, really, you know, and I had, you know, my school background had been a bit sciencey and a bit arty. You know, I did like physics A level and English, that kind of thing. You know, so I had the kind of head on me that sort of coped with the technical side as much as the other side. And then I had a sort of peculiar couple of years where I was still acting, but I was also working as a clapper loader. And I just had to make up my mind what to do. And the acting sort of drifted away. You know, that movie was the biggest thing I ever did, and nothing came of it. You know, I wasn't Rupert Everett. So I went to film school, and I guess I could have carried on loading, but the union was quite strong at the time, and it was very difficult to get where you wanted to go. So I went to film school to get my union card as much as anything else. But I was fairly successful, and one of the films I shot when I was at film school won quite a lot of prizes, and I won a cinematography prize in the Fuji competition, and I won a cinematography prize in the long gone BP Kodak competition. And part of that prize was to go to the Moscow Film School for a short while. Astonishing. Yeah. I didn't go for very long, you know, it was just a sort of, you know, a few weeks really, but, you know, an astonishing experience. And then when I came back, I picked the phone up to the people who'd been on the judging panel for that competition. And that's an eye-opener, because what you learn is obviously that some people didn't vote for you at all. So, you know, and that was my experience. I sort of rang someone and said, well, I didn't think you were very good. Eventually I found someone who said, yeah, you know, come and work for me. And I worked with this very lovely cameraman called Patrick Duval, and I focus pulled for him very badly. And I still feel shame about how badly I focus pulled for him. And then after that, it just kind of, you know, it does what it does for a lot of us, into that, you know, I was shooting pop promos with mates and short films, and it just kind of gathered speed. And then rather surprisingly, I had a child. I was not very old, and I had to sort of get my act together. Really, I had to earn some money and stop pretending that I wasn't something else. And I was offered a job at Aardman. I rang them up to borrow some lights for a prop promo, and they said, oh, what are you doing next week? Do you want to come in and help on a commercial? And I said, yes, that would be great. Went to Aardman, and, you know, there were 3 of them, and they were shooting commercials on 35mm, and they said, the set's over there, get on with it. And, you know, that's what happened. And so I learned on the job, but, you know, that was an intensely creative time in their development, and the level of enthusiasm and the level of drive to try and take what was really just a children's TV format, you know, that no one had ever considered had any cinematic merit at all, and to turn it into something creative and beautiful and worthy of being looked at, was what they were doing. And I was there then, and so I came up with them through that process, you know. That's a very long answer, I know.
That's brilliant. That's great. And so what was your sort of first project that you took on as DP on a stop motion?
On a proper film? Yes. I mean, it was actually Wrong Trousers. So yeah, I mean, I had done about probably 35 commercials for them at that point. And, you know, they had, in one corner of the studio, which was no bigger than this room, there was a little booth, and there was a kid in it making a film, and that was Nick Park, and he was making A Grand Day Out. And he finally finished it because he'd been asked to leave the National Film School because he'd been there for 8 years, and Aardman gave him a corner of the room to finish the film in. And, you know, then he made Creature Comforts. He was making Creature Comforts when I got there and finishing A Grand Day Out. They were both Oscar nominated. He won the Oscar for Creature Comforts, and then they had the money for Wrong Trousers. So Wrong Trousers was the first sort of Aardman-driven Nick Park movie, and they asked me if I wanted to shoot it, and I said yes. And we shot that with 6 people.
Wow.
In a room, really. It wasn't even a studio. A room with a wooden floor that moved, which is the worst thing for animation. All on 35mm. And that was really, you know, our first shove towards getting something cinematic, you know, and we really strove to kind of make it look beautiful, you know, and not make it look like a kids' TV show, you know, not Postman Pat or Magic Roundabout or whatever, you know, but actually something where the animation was just coincidental, you know, that we weren't lighting for the animation, we were lighting to make the environments look nice and make it look properly cinematic.
Yeah, it's about the narrative.
Exactly, yeah.
Absolutely. So what is your process on something like that? Because, I mean, you know, are you involved right from sort of storyboard stages, working through, and how does that, so at which point do you come in and where do you sort of start contributing?
It does vary from project to project, and it varies from director to director. So, you know, the ideal scenario for me is to get on as early as possible. So that would be when the storyboard is in some semblance of completeness and can be scrutinized. So I will sit with the director, or directors, is often more than one, and just go through the storyboard and learn the film. And the storyboard is a kind of biblical document, because what you can't do in stop frame is shoot coverage, because you're asking your animators you know, to enter into this process of animation, which is very long. It's, you know, it's not, people think it's a very slow process. It's not. Animators work as fast as they can, but you're asking them to put themselves into that puppet and deliver a performance. If you then say, well, can we do a reverse and a wide and just shoot a bit of coverage on that, you know, knowing full well that 4/5 of that, 9/10 of that is going to hit the cutting room floor, that is a soulless thing. You just can't ask someone to do that. So the film is made as the storyboard. So we pretty much know what every shot is before we're anywhere near shooting. So the storyboard needs scrutiny. So I'll sit with the directors and we'll take it apart and find out where it's impossible to shoot or where it might be more interesting to do something like this. And then that process rolls into the design process. So then I'm working with the art department, the production designer, the art director, the construction guys, the prop makers, and we're testing how stuff looks, you know, because super close scrutiny on very small stuff, you know. So and things as simple as, you know, the color of a wall, you know, are you using gloss paint or eggshell paint or satin paint, you know, how does that look under the camera and how does the character look in front of that? And whilst that process is going on, they're also developing the look of the character and they're casting the voices. And the film is created as an audio event first. So all the voices are recorded and cut, and then the storyboard is filmed and cut to match the voice. Right. So you essentially have a rough drawn version with the voices in. And the reason we do the voices first is so that we can lip sync to them properly with the animation. Yeah. So then I'm talking to the director about what does this film look like. So I'll be offering stills and clips from other movies and photographers that I love, that I think are appropriate. And if I'm lucky, I'll be able to sit in a viewing room and project stuff and say, what about this for this sequence? What about this for this sequence? And they'll say, yes, I think that's brilliant. Or I've got this, you know, I prefer this. So that's the normal process. Working with Wes Anderson is a slightly different process because he has a very exact view of what he wants. So he will send me piles and piles of reference. He'll send me 100 movies to watch. I say, right, watch these movies with no indication of where the shot is in the movie. Just watch the 100 movies. So it's a different process as a cinematographer working with a director like Wes than working with Nick Clark or, you know, anyone else I've worked with. Because normally you bring something, you bring suggestion to the table, whereas working with Wes, you are the machine, you are the conduit to get what's in his head onto the screen. And I used to think that was a slightly lesser role, but actually it's just as big a role, because what he's doing is he's trusting you to get the thing up now, you know. He knows exactly what he wants. He knows where he wants the camera. He knows the lens he wants it on, and he knows how he wants the lighting to look. So, you know, he'll ask you for something and you'll go, I don't even know if that's possible, Wes. And I think most other directors will go, okay, how would you like to do it? And Wes will go, just show me how far you can go. Right. I need to see this to know you can't do it.
That's probably quite liberating creatively, actually, because it gives you an opportunity to push yourself and also to help interpret someone else's vision, but with your own voice, really, at the end of the day, because it is still you. So
I think so. And it's interesting because, you know, so often during the process, I mean, when I did my first movie with Wes, you know, it was a frustrating process. It really was. And I think it was for a lot of the crew because we didn't understand his process. And then when we did I Love Dogs, it was much more liberating, as you say, because we all knew exactly what that process was. And so there wasn't anything that he threw at us that was in any way surprising. You know, no one stormed out of the room and went and screamed by the canal, you know, which happened a lot. And I'm sure Wes did the same, you know, because I'm sure we were just as frustrating to work with, you know. But it's, you know, he is a gatherer of people. And so to be rung up by him and saying, I want you to do this one now, you know, absolutely, yeah, let's do it, you know.
Brilliant. And so on something like Isle of Dogs,
yeah,
where there is quite a specific language, I would say, for the light. I mean, it's, you know, it's absolutely that world.
Yeah.
And having seen it, I couldn't imagine that world any other way. Do you know what I mean? That's just, it's just so right. How do you, so Wes will send you a reference, you've got to distill those references down into the bit that's actually correct for that scene.
Yeah.
What's your next step in the process? Are you able to do sort of mock-ups and camera tests? Is a lot of it hit the ground running and here we go?
No, and again, because of the animation process, you do not turn over until everything is absolutely right. Because you can't say to that animator, I'm terribly sorry, but the lighting and dressing aren't right. Would you do another one for me? As you can to an actor. You know, you can step in after a 10-second take with an actor and go, I'm really sorry, I'm just going to move the key light. You can't do that with an animator because they might have taken 4 days doing the shot. So it's a distillation process to the point of readiness. So typically what happens is, you know, the set comes in, it's lit, the art department go in, it's dressed, any motion control or lighting changes are worked out, and then it's offered to Wes. You know, what do you think of this, Wes? You know, what do you think of this look? And he will come back with very, very specific notes. So my initial way of getting into a movie with him is actually just to light stuff as I would normally light it, so I can see how he's going to push back on that. So the first few setups, you know, it will be inevitably, if it's an exterior, I don't want this much key light. You know, I need it flatter, flatter, right. flatter, 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 dimmer, 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 dimmer. And then we get to a point where we say, okay, now show me a bit of key light. So it's an additive process. You know, he wants to start at a base that's barely exposed sometimes, and then you just add a little tickle, or he'll say, just put me a single bright light on the horizon at night. And that can be as simple as taking an LED and gaffer taping it to the backdrop, because it's so far away, it's just a blurred point, you know. And so you learn that, and so you have those on standby, you know, and you'll think, I know what he wants. I'll put 3 in. You put 3 in, it's, and I want 5. And I want that one there. I don't want it there. I want it there. You know, so it's about polishing with him. You know, it really is. I always think of working with Wes as working almost as with a book illustrator. So, right, you know, a normal film, you cut, and the eye is taken to the place in the frame that they want you to look. So it's normally the person in the frame. With Wes, every single bit of the frame is important, even if you never really look there. So if there's a cup on a table and it's the wrong color, or it's at the wrong angle, that needs to be addressed. And so you get, it's like looking at a picture book. So you turn a page and you think, oh, okay, yeah. You look all around that, and then you turn another page, and then you have a fresh picture. And that picture doesn't necessarily have to be perfect continuity with the previous page. Right. It's a bit out. It doesn't matter for him, because it's about making a beautiful image, not necessarily about having a proper cut, you know. Mm.
And in terms of gear, so you're going into something like Isle of Dogs.
Yeah.
Do you have a standard palette of fixtures that you want to have standing by?
Yeah.
Because you also mentioned, and I'll come back to that in a sec, but you also mentioned the slightly extra little things you've got to have up your sleeve. Yeah. We'll come back to those in a bit. So what's your sort of starting palette?
Well, that's from a lighting point of view, you mean?
Yeah.
So from a lighting point of view, where we normally start is where we ended last time. So I'll sit with the gaffer and we'll go through what we had last time, and then we'll make some kind of decision based on the script and the animatic, you know, as to whether that's going to do us good duty. And you know, quite often our base kit does that. Right. But then it's the funky stuff that starts coming in. So it's the sub miniature stuff. So normally, you know, if you walked onto one of my stages, you would see a very familiar looking set of kit. You would see a number of tungsten Fresnels from 300 watts up to 12,000 watts. You would see some profile spotlights. You would see data lights. You would see some micro ellipses, which are these little Altman source 4 tiny 12-volt spotlights. But then you'd see a stack of extra tiny stuff, a lot of LED fixtures, but also a lot of very small tungsten fixtures, just because of the feel of that, you know. And we use everything from automotive taillight bulbs to, you know, torch bulbs, whatever is right. You know, I did a movie once where we had street lights and we were using these bulbs that they only made to go into telephones, old-fashioned telephones, some time ago, obviously. But, you know, like, and also those lights that they put inside. When you open the door on a car, those bulbs, we use those a lot.
Right.
So all kinds of stuff, you know, horses for courses. So the small palette is enormous. And of course, it's getting better. So when we were on Fantastic Mr. Fox, we started to use Roscoe light panels, which was a sort of very exciting at the time, but they were the most bizarre color temperature. So, you know, that became a process of how many layers of gel do you need to put on this before it actually produces something approaching tungsten light. But it was very useful because suddenly we had a square thing that was only that wide that made light come out, which was, that's quite useful, you know. Something with very low dimension is good for what we do because we work in very small spaces. So to be able to put in a fill light that's only that thick, super useful. And since then, I mean, the real improvements for us have been in color temperature reliability, you know. So I know I can get a 3200 Kelvin LED fixture, the size of, pretty much the size of a grain of sand, and it will produce light of the right color, and it won't be some filthy green or purple color, you know, and in all sizes and all manifestations. And I literally can just tape them up and they look after themselves, you know. And we run all that through DMX. Right. So everything goes back to dimmers. And I have a software system called Dragon Frame, which is a kind of multi-page thing. It's transformed the animation business. So basically it has a page for the camera, a page for the motion control, a page for the DMX, a page for the animator, a page for the audio breakdown. Everything is slaved to the same timeline. So I can take any point in the scene, apply a lighting cue, apply a movement cue to the camera, audio cue, whatever I need to do, and all the animator has to do is press a button. It just takes care of everything. It drives everything. The animators are left on their own to animate. We don't hang around because the concentration is so strong. And I guess the other thing I need to say, in case people don't know, is we are running upwards of 50 shooting units at once.
That was going to be my next question.
So we've got, you know, we have a huge amount of stage space, very big crew. So 50 cameras, 50 sets up at once. My inventory is normally around 80 cameras and 250 lenses. And the reason I have all those extra cameras is because they go through a cleaning cycle. Some of them break. I might need an odd one to shoot some tests on or whatever, you know. So we typically have a bit of wash in the system. And all those lenses and lots of lights.
So how do you manage your time across 50 sets and 50 sort of shoots? Because at some point it's all sort of happening at the same time, right?
Yeah, it is. So it is all consuming, I have to say, but I quite like it. I mean, it doesn't start at 50, you know, it starts at about 6 and then it just grows and grows and grows and grows. But it's kind of fun, really. I'm very, very strict about keeping some kind of notation of what's happening visually. So, you know, I'll do a mood script. I'll do a color script. I'll do a time of day script, which is basically just like a graph that I put on the wall of my office with the storyboard frames on it. So I can look at it. I can look at the schedule and I go, okay, right. So I know it's midnight and it's an exterior and this has happened. So tonally, we're in this kind of zone. I typically can handle about 15 to 18 units on my own. And when it gets bigger than that, I need to bring in additional people to light for me. So I have 3 guys and gals who've worked with me on a lot of projects, traveled the world with me, and they're all very good DPs in their own right. But when they come on, they understand that they have to work to the style of the movie, because I always say the movie has to look like one hand made it, and that's my hand. So even though they are super talented, you know, they can't go off and do their own thing. So I will sit with them and we'll go through a sequence and I will say, okay, this is what this has to look like. And they will shoot tests for me and we'll see them projected and I'll give them notes. So I have a top down on what every frame looks like, and it is all consuming. But on top of the daily running of the floor, because of the length of the project, you're in pre-production nearly all the way through the project because you're always working 8 to 10 weeks ahead. So I'll be in storyboard breakdown meetings whilst we're shooting. I'll be in the art department looking at sets whilst we're shooting for stuff that's coming down the pike. So it does consume you, but I find it enormously rewarding. Even though the first thing I think about when I open my eyes in the morning, before I open my eyes in the morning, is I'm literally going unit 1, unit 2, unit 3. What's going on here? What needs doing here? You know, so tick, 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 tick all day long. But it's great.
I mean, obviously, once you've set up your shot and you start shooting for X number of frames, it probably needs to be fairly consistent. And, you know, heaven forbid anybody walks backwards and bumps into something.
Yeah. We kill them.
I can imagine that would be a thing. Do you ever, how often is it, or how would you manage it if you have to do a shift of time of day? So a sun setting or something, because that's a linear time across X number of, I mean, I can't get my head around that process.
Well, the actual timing of the shot is predetermined with the animatics. So, you know, I know when I'm setting up a scene that it is 116 frames long,
Right.
you know, and I've got DMX that I can do frame accurate programming on. So what we used to do back in the old days, before you invented these things, was we would put a very, very large gel frame up in front of the light, you know, like a 10-foot long, 3-foot wide gel frame on a vertical tracker with a motor on it. And we would build a gel changer onto the front of that. And these were cut by hand, I hasten to add. So you lay down your various shades of orange if you're doing a sunset, and you lay them over the top of each other, get your scalpel, and you cut them like that so they interleave, and then you use heat-proof tape to stitch them together. So you have a continuous roll with these transitions on it, and then you program your motor driving this thing to run it from the top to the bottom. And so you go from afternoon to sunset. That all goes through the Dragon frame, and because it's all frame accurate, timeline linked, that will do that to time. It will do it in 116 frames.
That's very cool.
You know, but now we have lights that are capable of affecting a color change within the light as an ungelled thing. You know, we can change the color temperature on a light. Actually, just dimming a large tungsten feature does quite a lot of that. If you're trying to do a sunset, you know, if you're at a 10K up and you just dim it, it does half the work.
Most of the work right there.
Yeah, right. You know, you might wind it down a bit. We used to do all this stuff with tape and pen. I know this seems impossible to comprehend, but all camera movements were done by sticking a bit of camera tape around the head or on a tracker and marking it up in pen and moving it by hand. And that is how the iconic train chase in Wrong Trousers was shot. That is not motion controlled, that is hand dollied. It's on a tracker, but there's a guy holding that dolly in one hand and the camera button in the other hand. And there's a piece of tape on the floor with a cocktail stick stuck in a bit of blue tack pointing at the tape. And then you press the button and move the dolly, and that's how you get the background blur. And now it's all done with computers.
You mentioned that you use a lot of tungsten in what you do, obviously, because we all know it's a fantastic source. And I must say the thought of a 12K tungsten just makes me smile. It's got to just be the most beautiful thing.
Isn't it just?
How do you find the quality of light affects the model? Because you're working at obviously small scale and really up close.
Yeah.
Are you aware when you're using LED? Because I find LED a much flatter, much more brittle light quality. Is that coming across?
Totally. And I will be perfectly honest with you. I don't use LED fixtures as key lights in any way. I use them to provide fill, and I use them to light backdrops with. I'm not pointing them at characters. I'm using tungsten light for that. Or I might use them, if it's a nighttime interior, I might be using LEDs in my practical fixtures because they're coming through a textile or a paper or something like that. So it's doing a different thing.
Yeah.
But as I was saying to you earlier, if I'm shooting a daytime exterior, I use the biggest light I can find, the biggest tungsten light I can find. And this is all to do with the size of the lens, not to do with the amount of light coming out the front. Because if you're shooting a model and you want it to look like natural daylight, you need the shadows to run like that, because that's what the sun does. Because the Earth is this big and the sun is this big. Really, it looks small, but it's giant. So the light coming off the sun is really coming in straight lines. So if you put up a small light on the set, you get this all the time when I talk to students, that they're provided with inadequate equipment because they're given the 300 watt light to do a daytime exterior, and what that gives you is shadows that do that. So you immediately go, well, there's a light there. There's a light. It's not the sun, it's a light, because all the shadows are running off and they're getting very fuzzy towards the end and the light drops off too much. So if you put up a 10K big lens, you get much more coherent light. So you've got far more chance of cheating the eye, cheating the mind that it's natural daylight. And this comes back to what I was saying about not letting the animation get in the way of the look of it. It's just coincidentally animation. You need it to look right. Within the laws of the universe. I mean, animation is not a real world. Everything's a bit bonkers. I did a film where every character had one eye bigger than the other, and all the houses were slightly on the piss. But it obeyed the laws of the universe. It looked beautiful, even though it was cranky.
But that's what for me makes animation successful. Is it is this very unreal thing in a very real environment.
That
you've created.
That's what we strive for, because to me, I don't want anyone after 2 minutes of watching a movie to be aware that they're watching an animated movie. Why should they be? It's like a spelling mistake in a good book. Your eye suddenly goes, oh, I'm reading words. I'm not actually having this fantastic picture in my head. If you're suddenly made aware of the process, it takes you out of the the enjoyment of it. So, and that's true of all movie making, not just animation. Anything where it's so tricksy that you're suddenly going, wow, look at that camera movement. That's great, isn't it? No, hang on. What do you mean? It's not real.
Fair enough. We've had a couple of questions come in.
Yeah.
So the one we've covered already. So it starts with "and secondly," but we've already inadvertently answered the first part of the question. Do you ever mess with your shutter speed to help with exposure, or do you keep your shutter angle speed fixed when shooting, which is obviously different from shooting live action where you lock shutter to 48th or 50th, for example?
Absolutely. So shutter speed is the great gift to animation, because what we should also be talking about in tandem with this is depth of field, because we are working right up against the minimum focus on these lenses. And all your conventional lens maths goes out of the window when you're working that close to the camera. And so in order to get a close-up on a character, and let's remember the heads are maybe 30 mil high. So you've got a 30 mil head filling frame. So you're doing a close-up on that. Now, if you're shooting live action with a human, you can happily shoot that wide open, and the eye would be in focus, and the ear would just about be in focus, and the nose would just about be in focus. And if you shot at 2.8, that would all be in focus. Now I have to go to T16 on my lens to get that look. So to make it look like I'm nearly wide open, I have to be nearly shut down all the way, and that requires either a huge amount of light or a very long shutter speed. So we typically work between 1/4 of a second and 2 seconds. And we can do that because we're only taking one frame at a time, and it doesn't matter. So that ability to lengthen the shutter speed stops people dying from the heat. I mean, if everything was lit with 10Ks this far away, we'd be, which it would kind of need to be, if we were trying to get a 50th of a second out of it, it would be very uncomfortable. So yeah, that's what we do.
A question came in earlier from Jordan, and it sort of relates to fixtures being close. How, because of the scale world that you're working in, and we've kind of sort of, I think, inadvertently answered this, but do you scale your fixtures accordingly for the world, or not really? But I mean, they're out of shot, so it doesn't really.
They're out of shot, yeah. And obviously practical features are scaled appropriately to the world. All other fixtures are just what they are. I mean, remember, you've got a camera that's nearly the size of a character. No matter what you do with anything else, even a digital stills camera, which is what we tend to use these days, you know, a pro digital stills camera is about 8 inches high, and a typical animation character is 9 inches. So it's like having a very, very big camera. So the camera's in the way of the light, it's in the way of the animator. You know, you got that to contend with before you even think about anything else. But you know, there's ways around that. I mean, again, using LEDs, I quite often just put small LEDs on top of the lens. If I need an eye light on a character, the camera might be here, literally that far away, and the only way to get an eye light onto that character is to mount it on the lens, you know, and that's what we do. So there's ways around it. I mean, I guess that's the skill of it. It's just knowing how to make those problems just part of everyday practice, so they're not a problem anymore. You know, it's knowing how to select a lens that isn't going to compromise you, and to select a camera position and a lighting setup that isn't going to compromise you or the animator. And that applies to everything. It applies to the set construction. You know, if the set isn't solid enough, will it support a guy leaning over it every frame to get to the puppet?
Right.
Will that set cool down overnight and move? If it rains and it's a bit moist in the atmosphere, will the materials that set is made out of expand or contract and cause overnight set movement? Because a lot of these shots go overnight. So you come in the next morning, you want everything to look exactly as it looked the previous evening. And if you have to wait the set or warm the set up or cool the set down in order to get it to match where you finished the night before, that's a bunch of time you don't want to waste.
And also, arguably, you'd never really get it back to exactly the same
Never
position
get it
anyway.
back to, so, I mean, we used to kick stuff about. When MDF was freely available, it was great. What great stuff. We'll build it out of MDF. But MDF absorbs moisture. And if you build a room out of MDF, the damn thing will move if it rains outside. There's enough ambient moisture in the air to make the whole thing just crank round on itself.
Right.
So we use marine ply now, and we build all our bases on marine ply and scaffolding. And we used to build them on wood until we learned better.
Fair enough. I'm going to flip over. You've got some images and some clips and things. I'm just going to
yeah, let's just have a look.
pop into that.
I think the first frame is a blank.
So the first frame should be, first frame's a blank. The next one should be
a clip.
A clip.
Yeah. So that is the opening title sequence of the Isle of Dogs, as you can see. I put it in there because it kind of sums up a lot of what I've been talking about. So that this is classic Wes Anderson, super symmetrical framing, you know, and very, very simply done. You know, all the light in that environment is provided by 3 data lights projected from the top. And the last shot is 1 data light because the stage rotates and I couldn't spin the lights. So fair enough, we went to 1, and you don't see it change over. But again, you know, those puppets, they're small, their heads are that big, you've got that big close up there, so the camera's right in there, and all the light is just bouncing up off the drum skins onto their faces. So it's about letting light do what light does. I think a lot of people I see, I do a lot of lecturing for students at various colleges and things, you know, it's just, there's too many lights. You know, you don't need to add a light to make a light. You just need to put the light in the way of something that will do the job for you. You know, reflectors, surfaces, I mean, this seems like a bizarre parallel to draw, but if you look at, a mighty god genius like Conrad Hall, for instance, there is a man who knows how to bounce a light off a wall, to make the fill work. That's a very, very good way of doing things.
A lot of Isle of Dogs was quite soft, and was a lot of that bounce, or was it just sort of diffused softbox sources?
But both diffused and bounce. He doesn't like hard light, right? Except when he does. But if you know what I mean, generally it is a soft look, but contained, and symmetry. I don't know if you can see actually, but very subliminally on there, they're actually in a basketball court in a school. You can see the ring at the back. Just go on to the next frame for me. So this is just a little sequence of photographs to show how we get to an image. So this is a facility in the Isle of Dogs called the Animal Testing Facility, which is on the island. And actually, this was a set in which I had some influence over, because I sent Wes some stills of St. Peter's Seminary in Scotland, which is this brutalist Catholic seminary that was built in the 60s out of concrete, and then the water got into it and it became dangerous. So the monks had to leave. But it's got these fantastic sort of architectural, sort of brutal 60s feel to it. And I sent him some pictures, and some of the design elements in this, especially the little archways over the windows, are kind of based on St. Peter's Seminary. So this is the lit look of the scene. If you just go to the next. And here it starts to reveal itself as a set. Just go to the next one. And this is the scene set up for lighting. So as you can see, it's very soft sources coming in from the side. So two big 8x4 reflectors with cyc lights going up into them. The left is slightly hotter than the right, just to give some sense of direction. And similarly at the back and over the top, I've got reflectors bringing the light in. But because it's a contained space and there are windows, although the light is very flat and soft, it still gives you shape to that interior. And then at the top in the middle, you see there's an LED spot, little 12-volt LED spot, just hitting a hot space in the middle. And that is a Canon 1DX Mark II stills camera with a Nikon prime lens on it, which is a common setup for us. But you can see from the amount of poly in there that it's all bounce, 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 soft, soft, soft in there. And then in the deep background, underneath that sort of tunnely bit at the back, there is actually a strip of LEDs stuck under the kind of walkway at the back, just because that was a Stygian black hole. So we just lifted it. And then if you go to the next frame, to give you some idea of the scale of this thing, okay? So it's not that big. I guess it's about 6 feet long and about 3 feet high. This is it in the workshop. And that trench in the bottom is about animation access. So typically what we would do is we would shoot the set without the animation in it, so that we have the background information. And if there's a move, we'll shoot the move. And because we have this software, we can frame for frame accurately match it. And then the animator will go in and do the animation. And if they need to have the floor out to get in there, we'll shoot it without the floor. And then the floor will be restored back through that. And typically we'll take a wall out or a door out or whatever we need to do to give them access, and we'll plate that back in as a post process. But you can see there's a hot glue gun there. Once it's stripped back, it's just some MDF. It's not MDF, it's plywood. It's just some plywood and, some green paint. It's very, very crude, really. So it's then about making it look nice, which is what we're there for. Just go on. So this is another piece of this sequence. And again, just showing this rat light. Can I advance?
Of course, absolutely.
This one.
Yeah.
Great. And this is another angle from the same sequence. And again, just using this big rat light.
You actually really get a sense of the scale of the models in the shot.
You do, absolutely. And again, just using cyc lights, tungsten cyc lights into poly to wrap this round. And then the interior, you see, is just this glow coming through from the back. And you suddenly get, although it's very soft, you get a lot of shape to it, because it's about texture. So the light fittings, which have got a metallic finish, are picking up those little pings and pieces there, and the grills on the front of the cages are finding the lights. It's about the light finding the texture. And, you know, again, this, exactly the same thing. Big soft polyboard on the left, big soft polyboard over the top, and one behind the camera. It's actually a really beautiful image, though I say so myself. This is the Saki bar, completely different concept, really. So this is lit predominantly from the right-hand side through this transparent wall with these little flasks of fluid, and that's actually a dye applied to the inside of the flask. Each of those flasks is hand-blown, and they are about 1.5 inches high. And there are these guys who blow glass for scientific stuff, for chemistry, you know, and so they will blow any shape in any size. You know, they make cooling systems for lasers and things like that, but they'll occasionally make stuff for us, and so we get this kind of micro glass stuff made. So they blew all these by hand, by mouth, you know, these little containers, and then we dyed the insides to give this palette of color on the right, and then over the top, power LEDs. It's got a big heat sink on the back, and as you can see, these light fittings are square, so they actually project a square shape, and Wes didn't like that at all. He wanted them to project a circle of light, which you can very faintly see.
Yeah, I see it there.
Faintly there. And so this set, it's about 12 feet long, but it's only this wide. And I had to lie on my back, because I like to do this stuff myself, because I like to be seen to be doing it. I had to lie on my back and scooch along the bar and reach up into these light fittings, which is big, and insert a tiny bit of steel pipe over the end of the power LED in order to get it to produce the circle. Cone. Yeah, which was very fiddly. But again, you know, it's beautiful.
I mean, that just the fact that, you know, that someone's hand blowing those little glass vessels, that just makes me so happy. I can't explain how happy that makes me as a concept. This is fantastic.
And you actually, you know, coming back to your very first statement, getting to do this sort of stuff actually makes going to work such a joy, you know, because there's almost nothing wrong with it, because you go somewhere and you work with people that not only you like, but are really good at what they do. And then someone brings this in and they go, there you go. And you go, right, let's have a go at that one, you know. Thanks very much, matey. You know, and that's why, you know, I'm always hand in glove with the art department. I'd say, what you build, we shoot. You know, we can't make anything look great unless it's great to start with, you know, and they knock out this fantastic stuff.
So how long would it take to build that lighting look? So the set arrives, how long before you start shooting?
Well, if the first AD really needed that ready to go, then I would have looks coming off that within 2 or 3 hours. And then Wes would start to give me feedback and we would start to fettle it. So from the set coming in to it being absolutely ready to shoot is normally a couple of days. But there's other considerations within that, and they're not so much lighting. There's a lot of animation, motion control issues, because the motion control operator works with the animator to develop the move of the camera. Because obviously, you know, if the character's walking or moving in any way, they need to time that together. So I just kind of throw them in and say, right, you sort this out, and then show me what you've done, and I'll give them comments, and they'll have another go. So
because then you would need to make sure that obviously no shadows or anything like that.
Exactly. So there's a kind of rehearsal process, if you like, a blocking and rehearsal process, to finesse camera moves and make sure, as you say, that there's no horrendous things like camera shadows coming out. This will give you some idea of how close we work to the puppet. And you can see on top of the lens exactly what I was talking about, which is 2 tiny LEDs for the eye light for this character. And what are we, 25 mil from her, which is why that's so close. And then the camera's mounted on a big motion control rig, which goes right the way down the bar. There's a shot that pulls back or goes in, one of the two. So that had to fit in under the roof of the bar. There's another angle on her. And you can see she's actually got a replaceable mouth. Obviously, the dogs were fully mech'd so that their faces animated without having to replace anything. They had ear paddles, cheek paddles, cheekbone paddles, tongues, jaws. Everything was mechanical on the dogs, and an entire skeleton. But the humans had replaceable mouths, and that scene is repaired in VFX afterwards. I took this picture because that's not a very good mouth, and it just illustrates that. They normally fit a lot better than this, and the color matches better, but this just illustrates this mouth shape. And this is access for the animator, as you can see, is severely limited.
That's tight.
Very tight.
Because you're doing microscopic movements on those characters.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is the Moco rig. This is with a big inclined prism on the front of the camera as well. And that's the access for this shot down there. So to give you some idea of how narrow that is, I am not the world's fattest man. And when I was in there, if I breathed in, my chest touched the stools. So it's very, and the animator, as you see, was slightly chunkier than I am. Now, Wes sent me a reference for this sequence from The Color of Money, which is a film about playing pool, Pool Hustler film with Tom Cruise and Paul Newman, the great Paul Newman. And it's about pool, and pool is innately quite boring. And they had worked very, very hard on trying to make the pool sequences exciting, and they are exciting. You know, you're in there with it. You know. And Wes said to me, he said, I'm sure in this shot that they put a hydraulic ram under the pool table and jacked it up as the camera came down. And I said, okay, maybe they did. I said, and he said, I want to do that in this sequence. And I thought, where do we do that? I said, well, I can't jack the bar up and down because it's really long and I haven't really got the space. He said, I want that effect. So we thought about it. So we detached the wall, this wall, and we mounted it on 2 rams and got it to move. So this is the wall mounted on rams going up, you see. We do for Wes. And so I'm now going to show you the clip of this sequence. And when the 2 women come together over the book, you'll be aware of it. It's not obvious, but it just helps. And you'll also see this big sweeping back movement. And the other thing to look out for on this is the flask of liquid traveling down the bar, which starts that big and ends that big, as it's replaced several times as it slides down the bar, just to give it that look. So hopefully.
Chocolate milk, cold. Tracy Walker, Megasaki Senior High Daily Manifesto. Are you Professor Watanabe's former assistant scientist, Yoko Ono-san? Do I have it?
もう遅いわ。Too late.
Do I have it?
Too late. 誰も気にかけないわ。Nobody care.
Do I have it? Do I have the story? Yes or no? On the record. I am sorry for your loss, but we both know that was no suicide. I need to prove my conspiracy theory.
Ben is dead. No future on Trash Island. I am failure.
Pull yourself together and act like a scientist. Professor Watanabe never gave up. Is this
It's
the
the wall
serum?
move.
The dog flu cure? The snout fever treatment? The end of the canine saturation crisis?
Last dose. Tracy, be careful.
So I've always wanted on stop motion when you see people crying, is that done in post or is that done frame by frame is that something that they do? Or is that a trade secret?
No, it's not a trade secret. It depends on the style of the animation. So in that, it's painted on. It's glycerin. So it's animated on. But I did a film called ParaNorman in the States, and which I'll show you a bit of in a minute. And all the faces were printed, 3D printed. And there was a fresh face for every frame. So there were 385,000 faces for the movie, something like that. And they could print the tear sequence into the face.
Wow.
So in clear. So you could, the whole thing is printed in one go. So all the color goes in and the transparency and the levels of density in the material all get printed in one go. So they could print a clear tear over an opaque face.
Wow.
All in one part, which is pretty impressive, actually. So that's how they do it there. And then it's mostly glycerin, to be honest. And that works for rain as well. So whenever you see rain going down a window or on a car windscreen, it's normally glycerin. And the great thing about glycerin is you can build it up with a paintbrush and then it starts to run under its own mass. Because it's much denser than water, it kind of animates itself. As long as the animator's working fairly regularly, taking frames, it kind of does its own incrementing, as long as you keep the mass of it built up.
Okay. And then on something like on an Aardman where they do a sort of mud splat, because it's a very, and it sort of splats out. Is that done in post or is that actual little step frame of animated bits? And we're no longer on lighting world. We've just completely disappeared into plasticine world. But
it kind of, well, the thing is, it kind of is a camera question because we used to use the best possible way of doing it at Aardman, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So at Aardman, we did a lot of hybrid stuff like that because organics are very difficult to do in animation. You cannot do fog, smoke, water, rain, anything that has random Brownian motion, you can't do in animation because it's there, and then 20 minutes later when you take another frame, it's over there, and it just looks choppy. So it's super difficult to do. So you can build, if you do a splash, like at Aardman, we would do a splash and the animator would build the splash, but then we'd probably go into the car park at night and shoot some stuff at 100 frames a second against black, drive a car through a puddle or something, and use that live action element and pop it back in. There's a scene in Post Shave, I think, where Gromit lights the gas under a kettle. That's a real gas ring. We did that in someone's kitchen, and then we just dropped it in afterwards. And we used to do that with rain a lot. So again, the rain sequence in Wrong Trousers, all the rain on Gromit is glycerin and little droplets made out of clear cell, old-fashioned animation cell cut into droplet shapes, which are just placed for a frame. But the rain across the top, that's in the Aardman car park. That's someone with a hose, a big light, and turning the camera over, and then that was laid in as an element. And similarly, in Curse of the Wererabbit, lots of puffs and grit and dust and smoke. We actually shot them as live elements. But Wes hates that stuff. He absolutely hates it. He wants it all in camera. So this is why Fantastic Mr. Fox especially has that super old-fashioned feel to it, because the flames are carved soap and the smoke is cotton wool. And in Isle of Dogs, the water is cling film and hair gel. So it's ways of doing it. But then if you look at Chicken Run, when Rocky's taking a bath, that is hair gel and glass beads. Makes the foam, because it's much easier to control, and you can actually get a really nice foamy water look doing it that way. So you don't want to overdo the post-production, but I think it doesn't hurt to use it now and again. But Wes is super old school, and I've even used techniques like Pepper's Ghost for Wes, which is an old theatrical trick where you I just did it with a sheet of glass in front of the camera at 45 degrees, and you can actually project an image onto the glass. The camera looks through the glass at the set, and over here you can have some cotton wool on a piece of black material which reflects into here, and you can actually get someone smoking. So you can animate your smoke over here, and it appears transparent because you're effectively double exposing it over the image using this. I'm explaining this because I don't think everyone understands the purpose of Ghost, but because you're nodding, I know you do. So that's good. But yeah, those organic effects are always a problem. And when I first showed you that picture of the animal testing facility with the atmosphere in there, that was a reference plate for VFX,
right?
Because I can't shoot the animation with that smoke in, but that's how I wanted it to look. And that atmospheric density is the hardest thing to do. So you just have to find other ways of making stuff look atmospheric. And it's, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, lighting helps, I'm sure.
Lighting helps, yeah,
lighting
but you
goes
know,
a big
we
way.
live in an age where nearly everything you see on the telly, someone's scarfed a hazer in there first to give a bit of, you know, a bit of, I feel like a bit of density, you know. So that very clean look that you get in animation is kind of not in vogue at the moment. There's, you know, there are other ways of trying to do that. We quite often use veiling flare to do that. So we'll get a flare over the lens, not a point flare, but just a veiled flare, just to kind of lift it, almost like pre-flashing, you know, from the old days of film, just to lift the density in the shadows. But you've got to be very careful with that, or it can look disastrous.
Yeah.
Do you want to see some more stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this is I'm hoping the sync's going to hold on this, and if it doesn't, I will stop it. This is the municipal dome from the Isle of Dogs.
Canine saturation has reached epidemic proportions. An outbreak of snout fever rips through the city of Megasaki. Blizzards of infected fleas, worms, ticks, and lice menace the citizenship. Dog flu threatens to cross the species threshold and enter the human disease pool. In a special midnight session at the Municipal Dome, Mayor Kobayashi of Uni Prefecture issues emergency.
Okay, so this is very deliberately a homage to Citizen Kane, this sequence. And if you look at this image from Citizen Kane, you will see that it is mostly a matte painting, which is basically an old technique, which I will explain for those who don't understand, where basically only the very middle of that image is actually photographed in the camera as a live action element, and everything else is a painting. So the audience, and you can see at the back, you know, it's exactly what it looks like. It's a painting. Even the volumetric in the light is a painting. So they've created this very sort of theatrical look and saved themselves a fortune on extras and set. And we very much wanted to replicate this in this sequence. So that big tilt down you see at the beginning, where it comes down through the rack,
I think that's great.
there's only one balcony, you know, just shot over and over again, and then pasted together to create that feel. And you know, every time you see the audience, although we have, I think, 200 puppets as the audience.
Were they actual individual?
Yeah, but they're just hard casts. They don't animate. So we shot a bunch, and then we moved them, and we shot them again, and then we moved them. And of course, with a camera move, this actually becomes quite complicated. It's you're kind of stacking image over image over image. In terms of lighting that municipal dome, we come back to the tail lights on the cars. So all those paper lanterns, which are actually a cast resin with a bit of Japanese calligraphy on the front. They have a car tail light, 12-volt bulb in the back of them, because I was able to dim them and just get that glow. And I needed the lights to come all out from the whole thing. And LEDs tend to be quite directional, you know, but I just needed that glow. And the opening shot is actually shot upside down, so you can just see through the window the curve of the dome there. It was just much easier to shoot it that way than that way. So the camera tilts down off that, and then up there you can just see the beginning of the balcony, the one balcony. The camera tilted and then jibbed up, and then we took that bit away and jibbed up again, and jibbed again, all offset every time in order to build this. And you can see reflected in the black lacquer, you can see the source in those lanterns. And those little green screens are doing what green screen does, which is just providing something outside the window to put the night sky into.
So how long would that scene have taken to shoot?
Well, that's not the only scene in that environment. We keep cutting back to it. But so that set and various elements of that set ran a very long time. I think it's probably up for 10 months, that set, but in various manifestations, you know, and there were a couple of stages in 2 different scales, and that set with the gallery was just the gallery and the dome, and then we had like breakout, like the wings were separate sets. But a lot happens in that environment. You know, there's a dogfight and there's an explosion and all kinds of stuff. So it just kind of rolled on. And you also have to be aware of puppet availability. So although we build multiple iterations of each puppet, you know, we might have 6 of each of the main characters. You do reach a point where they're not available and you have to wait, you know, for them to come out of the dressing room or whatever, be finished. And this is just showing, you know, this green screen behind. This is a sort of bit of crowd replication here. Just to give you some idea of the scale of it. This poster cost an absolute fortune. It's printed on aluminium so that it's stable. This is another shot from Kane, and again, everything through the frame is just a painting. And boss Jim Geddes watches Kane's entry into politics, and then
This was one of the references that Wes sent you.
Yeah,
he gave you this film to watch.
Yeah, exactly. This is the only English language film he sent me. All the rest were Japanese. He sent me 100 Japanese movies, 99 Japanese movies.
Your Japanese must be very good now, I would think.
I didn't understand a word of it, but the funny thing is, I mean, what he wanted, and I think this is, you know, worth talking about, is he wanted a distillation of a sense of Japanese cinema. So it was everything from sort of anime, you know, very modern animation style stuff, going right the way back to black and white, and everything in between. And what you realize is a lot of Japanese cinema is trying to emulate Western cinema. So you get, you know, you get cop dramas made in the 1970s that are trying to be French Connection, but they're in the Japanese style. But, you know, people are wearing like Stetsons and things like that, and waistcoats and carrying big guns and driving fast cars around Tokyo, you know, like they're, you know, so there's a kind of double distillation from Japanese cinema to Hollywood back to Japanese cinema. And then you're looking at some really sort of hardcore Seven Samurai sort of stuff, you know, which is probably Japanese. And then all the graphic stuff. So, you know, the woodcuts of Hokusai are very important to the look of the movie, especially the sort of flat colors, the 2-dimensional feel, you know, the views of Mount Fuji, that sort of thing, you know, that plays very heavily into the design of the movie.
Right. What would you say is the most difficult thing to do in stop motion from a I mean, generally, but is there something that if someone says to you, I want to do this, that you think, not sure how we're going to do that? Or is it easier because you're doing it frame by frame? Can you deal with most things?
No, I mean, in fact, the hardest thing is because you're doing things frame by frame. Okay. So what you don't have is motion blur. So you naturally have, even just a simple pan, you have motion blur, and the eye is used to that. If I panned onto you, it'll be motion blur. If I pan onto you in animation, every frame is a discrete event. So you get a lot of strobing. So any fast camera movement, Wes is very, very keen on these parallel tracking shots. So he'll pan along a row of houses or something. And he does this in all his live action movies, and he likes to do it in his animated movies as well. And the problem is the strobing becomes absolutely horrendous. And I always say to him, this is strobing really badly. And he goes, yes, it is. Is there anything we can do about it? And then the VFX team will go, well, we can put some motion blur on it. And you go, okay, well, show me that. And he goes, no, I don't like that. I'd rather have the strobing. And so there are these shots, and every time I see them, I just think, God, what's going on? And in fact, that animal testing facility sequence starts with an enormous tracking shot. An absolutely beautiful set that looks fantastic. And so much of it is lost to the fact that you're just going, oh, it's just going like that in front of your eyes, just stop so we can have a look at it,
I mean, the detail in this.
Yeah, you've seen more of it there than you see in the film, because I've stopped the frame.
Extraordinary. Yeah. It really is. We've had a question come in. How do you deal with keeping the comedy of a scene when scenes take so long to capture? And that's probably less of a you thing, but perhaps more of an
it's an animator thing. Yeah, I mean, I think you have to understand that the timing, the finished timing, the live timing of the scene is a predetermined thing. So quite often the animators will work with the director and they will act out what they're going to do. So this is we have a booth called the Lab, the live action video booth, and the animators will go and they will film themselves doing stuff and doing gags, and so they'll then talk to Wes about that, or talk to whoever about that, and they will arrive at a performance that, if it needs to be, is innately comic or tragic or ridiculous, whatever it needs to be, or quiet. Wes is a great one for stillness. And so they go into the animation process knowing that. So they know what every frame looks like. But there's a lot of alchemy in animation. Good animators are rare beasts. They really are. And the film is cast very much like a film is. So animators are allotted characters. So because they put themselves through the character. If you know animators well, you can look at a film and go, yeah, well, I know who animated that scene. It's he's the guy or she's the girl who does that stuff well. Close up, quiet, meditative stuff. One person will be able to do that. Another person will be able to do the backflips and the 300 troops coming over the hill. It's a different skill set. So animators are cast appropriate to what they're best at.
It's a dual casting, really, because there's the cast for the voice, and then the cast for the character.
Exactly, and actually even triple casting, because from the voice comes a lot of the design of the puppet, actually. Right. So the initial designs tend to go out the window once the voice is established. So you get that building of that face and that character based on the voice. And then the animator goes in and has to meld all that together. It is a tremendous skill. I take my hats off to them. It's not something I've ever wanted to do, but the guys who do it are very good at it.
Another question that's come in: do you have any advice for beginners in stop motion when it comes to investing in the right lighting gear with limited budgets?
Well, it depends. If you're an animator, and you're practicing your craft as an animator, then you can light very simply, and you can buy small LED panels off eBay for 35 quid, and that's a good option. Buy a couple of those, so at least you can have a key light and a fill light, or a key light and a backlight. And anything white immediately doubles your lighting options. A sheet of white paper. To this day, it's not unknown for me just to stick a sheet of A4 to the surface of a set out of shot with a bit of camera tape to provide some additional fill. Just play with bouncing the light back in. You can use one key light and just bounce it back in, and everything is done for you. It's you're self-filling off your one light. If you're absolutely strapped for cash, there's nothing wrong with an angle poise lamp. It'll do the job. And I mean, honestly, it's just a light source. It's up to you to find out ways of tuning that. You can take an angle poise lamp and you can put a piece of tracing paper over the front of it, or you could put a pair of tights over the front of it, or a piece of cloth with a color to it. you don't have to buy lighting gels. And because you can jazz with your shutter speed, you can use a very long shutter speed. If you haven't got much light, you just increase your shutter speed or increase your ASA. I mean, most cameras will happily produce a very decent image at 1600 or 3200 ASA. You don't even have to worry about that anymore. So, there are ways of coping with very little light. If you've got money to spend, I don't know that I would advise you buying proprietary film fixtures unless you've really got a special look that you're going after, because they cost money, and LED fixtures are expensive. Tungsten fixtures are slightly less expensive, but you have to replace the bulbs. There are so many things that just cost a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. It's an expensive process, It's almost worth starting with your iPhone and available light and seeing what that does, because you know what, that might be quite fun to have a bit of time-lapse daylight running across the scene. I don't think there's any particular mystery or magic to having special lights. I think whatever produces a light, you can use to your advantage. And even if it's producing the most filthy colored light, you can set the color temperature on your camera to compensate for that. A lot of domestic LED fixtures are a bit green or a bit magenta, but you can dial that out on your camera. So I'm sorry if that doesn't sound like any advice at all, but I think what I'm trying to do is to reassure you that actually there isn't necessarily any cachet in having the special stuff. It's expensive. And if you are starting out, just use what you've got. A reading lamp is fine, honestly.
You touched on tungsten lamps blow, which they do, of course. Lamps fail.
They do, yes.
What do you do halfway through a shoot? Your lamp goes.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a pain in the arse, actually. So they do blow. They blow less often than they do in the live action world because they tend to be screwed to the floor. And actually, the biggest problem with lights blowing is them being moved. We also have them on a very long ramp up in the morning so that they are dimmed up. We run all our tungsten lighting at 90%, because what tends to happen when a bulb blows is before it blows, the element will partially fail and it will get brighter. And what we're trying to do is to match the last frame with the next frame. So inevitably, when you put a new bulb in, it will look dimmer. So we have that 10% left on the dimmer in case we need to brighten up the new bulb to get it to match the blown bulb. And if we really have to, we just jack a bit more voltage into it. So it's not unknown for us to go to 11, if you like, just to keep that going.
Right. I mean, even running at 90% will almost double your lamp life in itself. I know from the architectural projects I used to do, the difference between running a lamp at 100% and just at 90% for the eye is not a huge significance in intensity, but it literally almost doubles your lamp life.
It does, yeah. Some lamps blow more readily than others. I mean, the smaller the housing, the more likely it is to blow. So, you quite often get decent life out of a 2K or a 5K. It's the sort of dado lights in the 300s that tend to go bang, really.
Yeah, that's the lower voltage lamps probably are a bit more a risk.
Yeah. And often, there's a lot of dodgy bulbs out there as well. It's often worth paying the money to get, especially for dado lights, I think it's often worth paying the money to get the proper bulb to go in those things, because you can buy a bulb that is a fifth of the price and will last a fifth of the time. So you get what you pay for, I think, mostly.
And in terms of, so if we look at any of the sets, when you're placing fixtures, how aware of you, I suppose you have to be quite aware, but of finding positions that work for you, but that are not likely to get bumped when someone's leaning in to do stuff? Well,
there are ways. I mean, we work, as much as possible, we work away from the set. We make a space for the animator to get in, but everything is weighted and glued to the floor, and the floor preferably is concrete. So that's part of the Sparks job, is once I've said everything's good, they go in with hot glue guns and everything is hot glued to the floor and either stage weighted or double sandbagged. The animator knows that if they accidentally knock a light on the camera, they pick the walkie-talkie up and they tell someone so that we can go in and remedy it. And we've all been doing it for long enough to know how to fix it. You know, even if it takes 20 minutes or so of tapping the stand with your foot, you know, we have such good video tap now because we essentially take a live feed off the chip. So we have a high enough resolution image to be able to do a very close match. You know, it's not like a black and white tap on a 35mm camera, because you don't know what the hell you're looking at. But yeah, we have a like for like look, and we can grab frames off just to double check. And a Dragon frame again has a digital spot meter within it, so we can actually pick out a 1 degree point, 2 1 degree points, and compare like against like. So we are helped in that way, but it's still, yeah, you still get a slap wrist if you do it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, at least I would have thought, depending on
At
the
least,
scale of the bump.
And some lamps are very, very difficult to change the bulb on. You know, some are super easy, flip, change, done. You know, but again, like a day-day light, you have to deconstruct.
I was going to say, so is that a
bouncing
consideration when you're choosing fixtures?
Yeah.
Is, you know, I'm going to put this here. If that lamp blows, am I going to have to de-rig the fixture to, or, you know, take the front lens off?
Yeah, there are some lamps that are very useful, but for long shots are totally impractical. And I would, you know, I'd rather use an Altman micro Lips, which actually just uses a kind of domestic ceiling 12-volt downlighter bulb, which will last for 40,000 hours. I'd far rather use that rather than have to dismantle a day-day light, because you have to you lose your focus point on it. So you have to mark your focus point, drag it out, take the back off the lamp, take the bulb
Probably
out.
never really get it back.
Never really get it back.
Exactly.
And because they are pivoted off a single place, you know, they're only friction locked as well, those lights. Not that they're not great lights.
No, we're not. That was absolutely.
I have a lot of them. Let me just finish this little thing. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So,
And just about live audience, if there are any questions, just sort of wave at me, and I will sort of come back out at you. I haven't sort of forgotten that you're there. So do feel free to get my attention.
So we were looking at this Boss Jim Biddy's Watches Kane's entry into politics, and this was sort of our attempt to recreate this. This is a very early VFX slap comp of the reporter looking down onto the auditorium, and then I'll just play you. I think the next one is a clip, and you'll see her complete with her reflection, which we shot as an element with a piece of glass, which we ran in and out. So we had her with and without her reflecting, and you'll see this all put together.
犬に不公平だ。
Again, but
It's
there you
not
can see
fair to
her
the dogs.
stuck in there.
The path favored by Mayor Kobayashi is cruel and unscientific.
So something like that, where there was a visible cue change.
Yeah.
So is that change then done incrementally, frame by frame? So in frame 1, it's at 50%, frame 2, it's at 42%, and so on and so on.
It's graphical. So I will say at frame 1, I want it at this level, and at frame 117, I want it at this level, and then it will draw the curve. The software will draw. I don't have to go frame 2 here, frame 3 here, unless I want a very specific look. It will draw me a curve, and I can drop in cue points on any channel. I think it will be 500 channels, and I can drop in a cue point anywhere within that, and it will draw the curve between those points. So it can go down and up and down and up. You can even do your flash. If you
I was going to say, so if you wanted to do, you know, driving in a car, like passing through the trees, that's all done intelligently through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are various kind of sneaky fixes to stop someone having to do that 500 times. You know, you can copy and paste, and you can loop. So you might only have to build half a second's worth, and then just duplicate and paste and whatever. You know. So,
and something like a gobo, for instance, if you want to do, I'll do leaves because windows, you can just shine a light through a window. But if you want to do sort of some dappled light, and anyone who knows me, and you can just have to look around the room, I'm a big fan of a gobo. On a scale, that's a problem, because you're going to end up with a leaf breakup that's the size of the set, really. Do you know what I mean? How would you, so if I wanted to do a sort of dappled thing, I couldn't just pick a normal source 4 with a leaf gobo in, because the scale would be completely wrong.
No, and I wouldn't do it like that anyway. I would do it with a Fresnel and put something between the Fresnel and the set. But I mean, what you can't use is real foliage because it'll wither and fall off before you finish the shot. So we have artificial foliage in various scales for exactly this. You know, so I can put up a leaf size this big or a leaf size this big, just depending on what we want. But the majority of the breakup we do, again, is to dispel the lit look, especially at night. You know, you do the classic bloody blue moon thing. You know, it has to. People need it to be blue to believe it's night. So, you know, we pick an appropriate blue, but it looks very, very lit. So we tend to use these rather lovely cuculorises that Matthews make called a cello. I don't know if you're aware of them. They're basically a steel mesh, very fine steel mesh with a plastic matrix. And they then burn through the plastic matrix with a little blowtorch to create a disruptive pattern. Okay. The light comes through the plastic matrix and it also comes through the hole. So you get a super soft dapple. Right. And we double layer those in front of the moon. So it just gives the appearance that there's a few little clouds up there in front of the moon, super soft, random dapple, which makes so much difference. It just stops feeling lit and just feels more natural. It's just getting something in the way, you know, it's a bit more organic, I think, than just a source going, it's the moon.
And I guess it's largely an experience thing, but when you arrive at a set and you start putting up stuff and setting levels, how much of that is with you looking at the set and how much of that is only looking through what the camera's seeing, so on monitor?
I think it starts looking at the set, you know, with one hand on the dimmers, and I'm super additive as a lighting exercise. I mean, I like to use as few lights as possible. I hate walking into a forest of stands on a set, and if someone else has lit it, I will have a word if I'm in charge, because you don't need to, you know. You can have lots of practicals, you know, that's absolutely fine. Sure. But you know, if you're trying to make something look natural, you want to keep the number of lights right down, you know. So the first thing I will do is I will put the key light up and I'll take a look at that, you know. Is that the right height, the right place, the right color, the right hardness? Let's tune that first. Does it need some diff? Does it need a color? Does it need to be a bit higher, a bit lower, whatever? And is it in the right place? Is it casting the shadow? Is the shadow the right length? All that's the first thing. Right now, let's put some fill in. How are we going to do the fill? Are we just going to feed the key back in with some polyboard? Will that be enough? Sometimes that is enough. Walk away. Right, now let's have a look at it on camera and see what that looks like. Because obviously the camera has a characteristic very different to the eye, and you might need to put some more fill in. You might need to take some fill out. You know, some of the newer cameras are so damn sensitive, they can see in the dark, you know. So just finding something that looks right.
And because you're shooting up, you know, so close to when the puppets come in, I know you've got your sort of set shots and then your puppets come in. How much relighting do you do once puppets are on set, or are you in that world and the set light needs to be enough to deal with puppets too?
I normally get puppets in as I'm lighting. So the puppet department hold a number of standards, if you like, which are the right height, the right textile, the right fur, the right whatever, but they just don't animate. So they're just like that. They're like shop dummies. But I can put them in and I can see what the light's doing with them. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess if I was doing a big exterior, I might light it before I put them in because I know it'll be fine, you know. And there is a school of thought that says light the environment, not the characters, but because everything's so super tiny, you know, the chances of just hitting that ray coming through the curtains are much less. So sometimes you just need it. You need the character there to find it. And the other thing, you know, the really massive difference with puppets is that they don't have wet eyes. I know that sounds like a tiny thing, but a human eye will find a light source, and that's all you need. But the puppets aren't like that. Even when they're made of super shiny glass, they have two problems. One, they don't move together. So they're always slightly converged or diverged. and two, they just don't find the light in the same way. Because they're handled, every frame they're touched by the animator to line them up. So you don't have that beautiful wet eye that humans have or animals have. So you have to find the eye a bit more actively, if you like. You know. Can I show some more stuff? Or are we running out of time?
We are pretty close to time. I know. I mean, I could sit chatting all night. I really could. And if there's any questions from the house,
Can I show you this one clip?
absolutely, please do.
I want to show you this because it's so different. And this is a movie I did in the States after I finished Fantastic Mr. Fox. And Fantastic Mr. Fox was a film that was all about super wide lenses, super depth of field, super symmetrical, absolute Wes Anderson classic movie. And I went very quickly onto this movie, which is called ParaNorman. And I was able to have complete control over how this movie looked. So it's all shot on very long lenses, very shallow depth of field. And it's not in the least bit symmetrical, and it has a very, very different feel to it. And this particular scene is pretty much all in camera, apart from a little bit of atmospheric dust. So it's kind of cool. And that butterfly, obviously.
Aggie. My name was Aggie.
But you will see her cry in a minute, and this is printed into the face.
Are these the printed puppets?
Yes, these are printed puppets. So the face is located on 4 magnets.
And she told me stories.
Pops off. And then the scene is cleaned up afterwards. And when her eyes light up, that's a light inside her head. Like that. Whoa!
And I never saw her again.
And there's the tear.
Wow.
Sometimes when people get scared, they say and do terrible things. I think you got so scared that you forgot who you are. But I don't think you're a witch. Not really. You don't? I think you're just a little kid with a really special gift who only ever wanted people to understand her.
Yeah, so a completely different look, which I'm really actually rather proud of. And all the white in the background is actually the wall of the studio, because the set's so damn big, we couldn't actually get it far enough away. So we just painted the wall of the studio white, fired a load of light into it to give all that backfill. And then again, because of the size of it, this main bit in the middle where it says main tree, you may or may not be able to see that, but that and the key light had to rotate. So the background pretty much stayed the same because we just didn't have enough of it to shoot off. So I mapped out where the key light needed to be and where the tree needed to be. We rotated the tree and moved the key light accordingly as we changed angle on the character. And as you can see, I've written there, look, if you look, it says 10K tungsten Fresnel key light, and then it says highlight diffuser, then cello coccolorus, which is one of these soft cookies I was talking about, and then a hard timber coccolorus, what some people call an ulcer, I guess, just to give that natural breakup. And then huge banks of backlight with a row of source 4s at the back coming through the trees from behind, and then all those banks of cyc lights firing back at the wall. So the wall becomes the light source coming back through the trees. And as the trees go back, they become increasingly simple. So they're dimensional trees, and then they're fretworked plywood, and then they're just strips of cloth hanging at the back. And we've got this rather nice look. And it's super simple, again, because all that lighting at the back is just directional sunlight. It's nothing special, and the only real fill is this source 4 here going into the fill board just to hit the top of the tree, which was so high that we were missing it a bit with the other stuff. So, and then there you go.
Brilliant.
Haven't even talked about Fantastic Mr. Fox yet.
Well, we certainly can. I mean, like I say, I'd happily chat all night.
No, people are turning off, going, "Where's my dinner?" right now.
But so last thing to end off on top tip for someone who wants to get into this game, aside from don't do it.
Yeah. I mean, we are in need of younger people to do this, but you absolutely have to want to do this. You know, it demands a special mind, I think. You know, these are very, very long projects, and you need to know not just how to light stuff and how to photograph stuff. You need to know how the whole process works. You know, I know a shed load about stop frame animation. You know, I know how puppets are made because all this feeds into how stuff looks. So you need to be utterly dedicated to doing this stuff. And your best bet is to come on as a trainee on one of my feature films, because that's, you know, that's how we build crew. And I've got a woman who is a trainee of mine is working in the States now on Pinocchio doing lighting. You know, she's one of the lighting camera people on that. So, you know, there is a way up through. But honestly, apart from myself, there are probably only 2 people on the planet who are doing what I do at this level, because that's how much work there is. If you want to do feature films, you know, we have 4 shooting at once now. That's the most that's ever been shooting. And one of them had to, you know, not get the best guy. So there's not always a huge amount of work, you know. So you live on commercials and you live on shorts and you live on pop promos and stuff like that. But the idea, you know, in the normal world, if you're a decent cinematographer, you can roll from Netflix series to Netflix series for the rest of your life and make yourself a very tidy living. It's not like that with stop frame. It's just not that much of it. So you need to really want to do it.
It feels like a calling, really, isn't it? Because it's
not
so
a
specific.
I had, you know, I don't know if that little baby hadn't been born, whether I'd have ended up doing this stuff. You know, it was that keep coming back to Aardman to, you know, that regular wage at the beginning, to be honest, you know, and then it just became, I was in the right place at the right time, and that was a good place to be. So, but as in all, you know, as in all things, trying to give people advice as to how to get on is very difficult, you know. Absolutely. I mean, make tea, make a good cup of tea is as good advice as anything else, really. And don't be too precious that you won't sweep the floor.
Absolutely.
If someone gives you a broom, don't say, I'm not here to sweep the floor.
And when you're sweeping, don't bump the light that's set up in the corner.
You got it, you know. Because if you sweep that floor really well, someone will go, just, you know, why they sweep that floor? Maybe they'd be really good at this, you know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, for joining us.
You're welcome.
I could geek out on this stuff all night long. And I suspect
we're only halfway through my presentation.
I know, I might go through the rest of it as soon as the broadcast ends. So for everyone who has joined us, thank you very much. We know we're a little bit over time. Thanks for sticking with us. And again, thank you for joining us. We do Light Bytes first Friday of every month. Our next one is November the 3rd. So join us then. We will reveal the topic a little closer to the time, but please sign up on the website, etcconnect.com/lightbytes. You can sign up there. We'll let you know when the next session is available and what it's going to be. So thank you very much. Have a good weekend. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to our live studio audience. Welcome back. It's good to be back. Thank you to Graham in the background, who's been manning all the technical stuff seamlessly. So, and thank you for everyone who's joined us. Tristan, thank you again. And
pleasure.
Have a good evening.